Greetings, everyone. This is Mark Knoyer, and my paper today is going to be focusing on changes and continuities in seal carving techniques, function and artistry of the Indus and Indo-Gangetic traditions. Before beginning, I want to especially thank the Center for South Asia and all the staff for organizing the conference and making it possible for us to meet virtually. I also want to thank the Department of Archaeology and Museums, Government of Pakistan, the Archaeological Survey of India, Ministry of Heritage and Culture in Oman, and the Office of the Advisor to His Majesty the Sultan for Cultural Affairs in Oman. I also have lots of different funding agencies, and I especially want to thank Harappa.com for their support over the years and their continued efforts to make the access to the materials from the Indus civilization equally accessible to everybody in the world. I also want to thank my colleagues and the projects that allowed me to study materials and people who've discussed many aspects of what I'm presenting here today. I won't go into them in detail. Many of them are here at the conference, and we'll have time to talk about their papers and overall discussion in the course of the presentations. I'm going to start my talk today about the Indus tradition, and then I'm going to be moving into the Indo-Gangetic tradition. So just to remind people about the chronology, the earliest period where we have evidence for seals that we can identify that either are button seals or possibly even for sealing is from the regionalization era and about 4000 BC, which I'll present in the next few slides. The other period that is very important is the integration era, when we have a very highly diversified form of seals developing and many different styles of seals. And then we have the localization era, the late Harappan, where seals become less common, but we do have some continuities of technology and some styles. So we'll talk about that in this first part of the paper. The earliest seal that I know of is from the excavations at Harappa, and it's just a fragment. It's made of bone, and it's carved with a design that's geometric that possibly is the corner of a swastika. It could be another geometric form as well, but this is an example of one of the early forms of button seals. It has a hole here, so it may have been used as a pendant, but overall we have an example here of geometric designs carved on one side of a piece of bone that would have been either worn as an amulet or used for sealing. At the site of Mehrgarh, which is excavated by the French Archaeological Mission, we have a lot more examples of this early form, but they come from a bit later, about 3000 BCE. And we have them made in bone, we have them made in terracotta, and some of them are made out of stone, which is possibly steatite. They just mention it as stone. And this one appears to be whitened, so I would assume it's fired and glazed steatite, which is a technology that develops around 4000 BCE in Mehrgarh as well as Harappa. And then many different forms of terracotta examples, and one that has a animal motif with people being thrown up. So it's a very important motif that we see later on in seals carved in steatite. But this is the first example of that motif found in terracotta in a circular form. So the artistry here is carving soft materials like bone and clay and firing the clay to make it hard, eventually firing the steatite to make it hard and whiten it. So this is the beginning of what becomes a very long trajectory of seal making traditions. The next phase of development is seen during the Côte d'Ivoire phase, and the Côte d'Ivoire phase sees a series of different types of seals being made, some of them clearly with geometric designs that may have been used for sealing, but others that have an animal motif, which we see here on the elephant, and some of them were glazed. This is an unfired example that was not glazed yet. It could have been used. It's kind of worn and rounded around the edges, so it may have been used as it is, but these two examples here have glaze on them. So this is the beginning of a new trajectory, more advanced than what we saw in the Ravi phase, but clearly building from that earlier form. Here's a closer color version of those, and this example has glaze on the edge. You can just see the blue-green glaze here. No traces of glaze were found on this one, but this, I argue, is an earlier style because it's a bit rougher. and I'll show some SEM of the carving on this one. This later one, all the carving motifs have been obliterated and it's covered. You still have some traces of the glaze, but the surface itself is not very distinct. We can't see some of the working the marks. This is an example of one of the earliest form of animal motif on a Côte d'Ivoire seal. It has not been fired, so it does not have any treatment to it. And it appears to be partially carved and not with a finished style, so we can't really talk more about the style of carving itself. And then this is a sealing of what might have been a stone seal, and it has script on it with some geometric ladder forms and possibly a plant form. So this is an example of how seals were actually used. So this is the first evidence of sealing using seals from the Côte d'Ivoire phase. And it corresponds to a time period when we have also the development of cubical standardized weights, and we can link seals and sealings to control of access to materials. The details of the glazing is something that I've been studying for some time. Randall Law will be talking about this a bit more later, but this is an important feature that had been missed by some of the earlier archaeologists. So all these early seals had a glaze on them, and that glaze was colored. It was a blue-green or blue or green, we don't know. We do have beads from the Ravi phase and also from the Côte d'Ivoire phase that are glazed with a green glaze, which is made with iron, and a blue glaze, which is more copper. And all of these seals would have been covered with that kind of glaze. This is a circular button seal with holes on the side and circular designs on the front face. This is the one that I mentioned that has no trace of glaze left, but it probably was glazed originally. The glazes were made with locally available plant ash, the Haloxylon recurvum, which is a type of desert plant, and they use it today even for making fluxes for glazing ceramics in Multan and other places in Pakistan. I've analyzed this in various techniques using SEM EDS as well as LAICPMS with help from Laura Discipio at the Field Museum. And this is an example of glazed steatite beads from the Ravi phase. And even though the glaze is gone, the traces of the copper are still indicated by this very small percentage of copper. So this would have been blue-green on top of the white. And then this is an example of the greenish color, which is more iron, which may have been also a form of the colorant that they wanted to use. The SEM of the carving of this seal was, when I first looked at it, I thought maybe it was made with stone tools and that's why it's so rough. Then I went and thought maybe they were intentionally leaving it rough so that the glaze would stick. And unfortunately, the details of the carved surfaces are not well enough preserved to really tell for sure. I kind of feel now that it probably was stone, though it could have been a bronze tool as well, and it's hard to differentiate it. But I'm kind of going with the stone tool at this point. I've done replications of these, and I've tried to make glazes on them. And I've done it in two techniques. One is with just a sudjikar, so a flux mixed with a colorant and then applied and soaked into the surface. And this creates a very thin glaze that's colored. The silica coming for the glaze is coming from the flux material itself, which is a desert plant ash burned in the ground, so that there's silica from the plant, there's silica from the soil, and there's probably silica coming from the steatite itself. I've also tried it with a applied silica glaze, so I ground up some silica into a very fine powder, mixing it with a colorant, and then applied it. So this leaves a very much thicker glaze. Either way, these may not have been very good for sealing things. So the details of the carving is going to be covered with the glaze in this context. And here it completely fills the design so that it would not be useful for making stamps. So they may have just been for decorative purposes. Moving from the side of Harappa, we also see carved bone amulets with motifs and possible script from the side of Dremonderi. And this is associated with the Côte d'Ivoire phase. And this is clearly a pendant. It's not going to be used as a sealing or for a seal for sealing things. So it's mainly ornamental, and it's decorated on both sides. So it may have been hanging in a way that people could see both sides of it, or maybe one side is against the skin to protect you, the other side is visible to people, or you could flip it in different ways. But Remanderi also has the same types of steatite, fired steatite seals, button seals that we see at Harappa. This is an example from the recent excavations with traces of the glaze still in the surface. One's from earlier excavations with traces of copper-colored glaze here. And then these are also from the surface of the site, showing fragmentary pieces with double animal motifs on it. So we have a kind of gazelle form, two of them. You have the tail of one here and the head one here, an example of the legs and the head here. So this is an important motif that I'll come to in a minute. I want to thank the Dr. Durrani originally for letting me look at the materials from earlier excavations, Ehsan Ali, Abdul Samad, and most recently Zakirullah Jan, who unfortunately couldn't join us at the conference, but he was going to present material from Remanderi, and I wanted to make sure that this stuff is clearly understood. So Remanderi has some very important seals from this Côte d'Ijian phase that indicate similar technologies as we saw at Harappa. But I'm going to jump now from the Indus Valley all the way to the Gyeoksur region. And this is a amulet that is reported in a Russian journal, which I have unfortunately not been able to get access to, but it is published in a book by Saryanidi in 1998, where there's examples of various types of seals found in Central Asia. So I'm not sure exactly where this seal was found, if it came from excavation, but this is a Côte d'Ijian style Indus button seal. It has two animals on the back, similar to the ones that I just showed you from Remanderi, and it has a circle and dot motif surrounded by, in this case, a swastika motif, which is very typical of the carving styles of the Indus. So its presence here in this region suggests that Côte d'Ijian traders were interacting from the Indus all the way into this region, or traders from this region were coming to the Indus and carrying Indus seals back with them. And it doesn't make, I mean, it's not surprising because we know that lapis lazuli was commonly used as ornaments in Remanderi and even at Harappa. So these people would have been important for that trade and probably other materials coming back and forth. There are many more examples of Côte d'Ijian style seals in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, these all come from private collections, also reported in Saryanidi's book. I'm not going to go in detail, but you can see the designs, the double animal motifs, the animal and fish motif. These are not Central Asian styles of seals. They are Indus style seals. And these examples clearly indicate that many communities were probably moving back and forth between the Indus Valley and Afghanistan and Central Asia during the Côte d'Ijian phase. We know that that kind of trade was occurring beyond the Indus into the areas as far as Mesopotamia for shell, which I've studied. But this is the first, I think, confirmed evidence of the movement of these communities into the north during the Côte d'Ijian phase. In the other direction, Dr. Kunosukawa will be presenting this later. We have clear evidence of these seal types found in Virana, in Kunal, and in areas in the region between the Indus and the Gangetic Plain, so this region of Haryana. So this technology is spreading throughout the whole northern region, and some of it is going south as far as Mehergarh, which we saw some of the designs that I showed you earlier from Mehergarh from the Côte d'Ijian phase. So it's going into Baluchistan as well. And then the question is, where did it start, and where is the source of the steatite? So Randall Law will be talking about this later on in this conference, and I'm not going to anticipate all of his discussion, but he has already published in his dissertation the important sources of steatite during the early Harappan and then Harappan phase from this northern region of Pakistan. We need to eventually get samples of those seals so that we can analyze them. But they would probably be coming from sources in the northern region of Pakistan. So I would argue that that development of technology is in the northern Indus Valley, and it's from this area that it's spreading both west into the mountains, and then south, and then east, and that this is the core region where it's developing. We can also see that this is an area where we see a new transition of seal making to a form that is more complex, which is the glazing technology. And in the past, I haven't really been very supportive of the glazing motifs, the glazing idea, but I think it's very clear now that that surface is a glaze. It's on top of the surface showing the tool marks, and it is combining a material, silica from the seal, as well as the fluxing material to create this. So these are the different types of seals from period 3A at Harappa, and then Farmana, and then Konosukawa. We'll be talking about those later. We also have this in examples from the site of Watuwal in Cholistan, and then also from period 3A continuing, we have that transition from that form of carving to then more rounded forms of farm carving in period 3B. The analysis that I've been doing with SEM, which shows the carving technology, helps us to identify the techniques that were used for carving. And we clearly see use of very specialized forms of bronze tools for carving these materials. And you can identify distinctive features of the carving. Again, some of this will be discussed by Konosukawa in his paper. I won't spend a lot of time on it, except just to show that that carving style can also be seen on other materials, which is a chlorite. This is a seal from Salut found in Oman that was made on a non-Indus style material, but using an Indus style carving and Indus style of technology. And Dr. Furnez already talked about some of these features. This is the details of the technique that shows Indus style tools being used to carve the Salut seal. The late Harappan is when we see clear evidence that there's a major transition in seal use. The inscribed seals disappear, but the technology of making fired steatite and glazing steatite does not end. And that's where we see it, and we see it continuing in the form of beads, which are deeply incised and also glazed with sometimes clear glaze, but also sometimes a blue-green glaze. And we do have one seal from the Harappa site of Harappa that it dates to this time period, and it has especially designed circle and dot motifs on the back, and very distinctive style of carving of a floral motif on the front. This is a resurgence of some of the geometric forms that we saw before the emergence of Indus style seals during the Harappa phase, and it shows a continuity from the Harappa phase into the late Harappa period of the technology, but not the motifs. But the motifs themselves come from an even earlier period. That type of carving is also spreading all the way into the Gulf region. So in the Gulf, and again, Dennis talked about some of these seals already, but basically this is the Gulf seals found in Failaka and other sites are made with Indus style technology, Indus style carving tools, Indus style firing and glazing, but different types of motifs. And I want to thank the team from Denmark and Kuwait for allowing me to use these photographs. I'm going to jump now to a contrast with Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamian seals at the same time period were developing along a very different trajectory. And we have soft stone being used, but they're made in cylindrical form. We see chlorite, we see softer types of stone, jasper, as well as some limestone and shell. And during the Jemdet Nasr phase, the technology for making these was engravers and possibly microchipping to create surfaces that were could be then ground and polished or smoothed. These are studies done by Margaret Sachs and Meeks. During the second millennium, we start seeing harder stones being carved. And this is the beginning of a technology which is clearly associated with rotary techniques of grinding with a wheel and abrasives. So to carve things like hematite, which is this metal seal, you can't just use engravers with abrasive, but you need some kind of rotary technology. And this has been studied by Meeks, Sachs and Meeks as well, where they can show the use of engraving tools for certain styles and pecking, which is the continuation of the earlier technique, but then the addition of new forms, which is the engraving with a rotary technology. Now, Indus people also used abrasives, and the abrasives that the Indus people used were for drilling hard stones, as well as for micro drilling with tubular drills. And they were probably using emery or some kind of very abrasive sand that we're still trying to find the source of. Emery is found in the Deccan region, and this is an area that we know Indus sites were present in, and they may have been getting it from that region. The development of rotary technology is something that is not found in the Indus, and the question is, where did this develop? Most people argue that it develops in Mesopotamia during the Old Babylonian period, and they're using an abrasive which would have been some kind of form of emery. The question is, did that emery come from the Indus? Did it come from Anatolia, where we know there's emery use, or the Mediterranean, or did it come from Egypt? And so these are questions that I think we still need to investigate. The Neo-Babylonian form of carving is much more advanced, but they still continue to use engraving tools that are handheld, so the combination of rotary and abrasive and emery, with abrasive tools handheld as well as rotary tools. And then this technology disappears, and Jeffrey Ludwig will be talking about this later on. It disappears in the Mediterranean and then continues in the Achaemenid Persian and then spreads back to Greece. So this is the important feature that I wanted to kind of link up to the Indo-Gangetic tradition, which is a totally different process of seal development. So during the intervening period between the Indus and the Mauryan period, we don't have evidence for seals. There's not a lot of seals found in these early sites. In the painted grayware sites and the northern black polished ware sites, we don't really have a lot of seals. We start seeing seals in Achaemenid period sites, which are linked to Iran, and during the Mauryan period. And this is a time when we also know diamond drilling begins to be important. And diamond drilling is something that's happening that we know emerges in India, and the diamonds are from the Deccan region or South India, and they are being used to drill beads, and I'm arguing that they're also going to be used for making seals. So this is a diamond drilling technology for beads. We see it for drilling and perforating using a single diamond as well as a double diamond. And the features of diamond drilling are very distinctive because diamond is extremely hard, and when it cuts into carnelian, it leaves a very distinctive line. So the Indian, South Asian tradition of seal making, there's no clear link to the Indus. The new forms of seals that we see, which are probably metal seals, were used for stamping coins. And these are examples of different coin motifs on the punch mark coins, including possibly a unicorn. We also see punch mark coins from the Mauryan period, which is the period of time when there was interaction with the Achaemenid Persians. And this is, again, motifs that are geometric, linked to ideology, and no images of people being put onto this, but animals and geometric forms. Even when they do start using writing, they don't include it with a face or a person in the indigenous technology for seal making. So they include only writing. It's with the introduction of Greek seals, which we call Greco-Persian because they're actually coming through the Persian interaction, that we start seeing images of people. And it's this period of time which I think is really interesting because it shows a mixing of emery engraving with rotary technology that was continuing from the Old Babylonian period into the Achaemenid period, and the beginnings of technology that might be linked to South Asia. This is a seal which unfortunately I don't have a color image of, which is from the Greco-Persian period. It's pre-Kushana, according to Kalyeri. It's inscribed with a South Asian inscription, Deva Gatasa, which means it's probably made in the region of northwestern South Asia. And I've been able to analyze with SEM this material, and it is drilled with what I would argue is a diamond drill. So emery engraving was something that was done in West Asia, in Achaemenid Iran, but the use of diamond for drilling beads we know is demonstrated in South Asia, and here I think is some of the earliest evidence of use of diamond for making seals. We have many unfinished seals from the Peshawar Museum, and many of these I'm continuing to study. I haven't finished the analyses, but I just wanted to leave this as a tantalizing bit of evidence of a synthesis between South Asian and West Asian technology during the Indo-Gangetic tradition, and a change in artistry that combines materials and techniques from two different regions. And Jeffrey Ludwig will talk about this a bit more in his paper. So in conclusion, seal carving changed dramatically between the Indus use of artificially hardened stone to actually hard stone that required the use of emery and diamond to effectively engrave designs. And we also see a major change from handheld tools to rotary tools. And again, the technology that we think is linked to Old Babylonia is also possibly linked to the use of abrasives in that region. And I want to continue to try to explore where that technology originates from and how it evolves and how it spreads back into South Asian region. So I'm going to thank you there and stop. I know I've gone a bit long, but thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to questions at some point. Thank you very much.